I'm Zach, church planter, now pastor of Westside Reformed Church. It's a church plant in Cincinnati, Ohio. A little bit about my background is a little unique, so I hope I might have some different insights than people who might have grown up in CRC, URCNA, from a Campus Crusade background, in InterVarsity. So a little bit of parachurch experience. I've been in Cincinnati for 6 years now, and during this time, I'd like to pretend almost that you're a council room, and to kind of speak to you as if you're elders and deacons, because I think that this is a topic that especially our officers need to be mindful of. And I'm hoping to lay out something of a plan for how we can be more thoughtful and planned and strategic in our church planting. I think that one of the key things to understand is that church plants almost never just fall out of the sky and drop into laps. Church plants require thinking, planning, just diligence, order. When things do just drop out of the sky and happen in an unorganized fashion, I think we oftentimes end up with a disaster. So trying to put forward some ways of thinking about church planting in a very orderly manner. My outline here is to just cover 3 stages of concepts. So church planting as a concept, then think about core group, and then think about congregation. Last thing too, just by way of introduction for those who arrived here a little bit later. You need to have this book, you need to know this book, and you need to make sure that your officers are aware of this book. With 3-year terms of people rotating, chances are you had some elders who learned about this book's existence, then they're going to be rotating off, then the new elders won't know about this existence. Same with the deacons. The people might not know about this, so oftentimes the pastor becomes the person who is aware. We need to make other people aware also. This 4-phase thing, this is just summarizing the 4 phases that are found in this manual. Really helpful stuff. I don't want to repeat what's in that book because it's fantastic. I'm going to note 2 places where I do differ from the book, and I think it's significant, but I'll note that within this presentation. Okay? So, let's begin with the first point of concepts. Concepts. I'm going to spend the most of my time here with concepts, because I think that this is where we within the URC, and maybe even broader in the Reform world, I'm not sure, fall short. We don't have a clear vision and goal for where we're going. And so when we don't have a clear vision and goal, we don't take those necessary steps early on to get there. We end up being very reactive in our church planting rather than being proactive, being strategic, laying long-term groundwork, infrastructure that's needed before you begin a church plant. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this time, it's that. We need to be planned. I've given you a draft 20-year plan for Westside Reformed Church. This is a draft. I'm going to be presenting this to our council at an officer retreat this summer for discussion, for deliberation, for revision even. You can see in that there are a number of years there in this 20-year plan. I'm encouraging you to do at least a 10-year plan. So I'm encouraging you to do at least a 10-year plan. I got 20 years here, okay? Write it down. Write down a plan. Be clear about this. Why am I saying this? Because if something is written down, well, then it's an opportunity for discussion. In your council room, as you sit down with your elders and deacons and you formulate a plan together, you have something that's written down to be discussed with one another. Is this wise? Should this be revised based upon our current state as a church? This is something that's written down to be prayed for, prayed about. You have a goal, a shared goal we can pray about. This is written down for the purposes of planning. As you see here, we have 20-year plans of draft, where in 2025, Lord willing, we would begin to have a daughter church in the Cincinnati metropolitan area in northern Kentucky. That's important to have this written down here, and if our council adopts this, because then we begin to be planning for years in the future to say, okay, it's 2019 right now. We have 5 years to be thinking about this. 5 years to prepare people in northern Kentucky who are part of our church to become a church plant of their own, right? That matters. We want them to be thinking, the people in Northern Kentucky, be preparing in their own minds that one day they will be part of another church plant. We need to prepare them for that. So for planning, for training even future church planters. This is an opportunity for unity. If you have a shared vision of where you're going as a church, it's an opportunity for unity within your council room, even within your congregation, which I'll come back to in just a moment. This is also, I think, an opportunity, if you have this 10-year plan written down, it's an opportunity for perspective. We oftentimes become overwhelmed by internal matters within our churches. And because we become overwhelmed by internal matters, we forget things like church planting and missions. We become consumed. We become navel-gazing even at times as a church, but navel-gazing. If you have a plan written down that's been adopted, well, it brings you outside of yourself. It directs you outside your walls again for a moment to reconfigure, and it helps you remember many of the most important things, namely getting the gospel out to the nations. Okay? So I'll give you our plan. Let me just quickly run through that for you. There's Indianapolis there. We've been working with Indianapolis for years now with some contacts in Indianapolis, but because we were a church plant, we could not be helpful to them. Now, once it became clear that we in Cincinnati were going to organize, we began to reach back out to them and say, hey, are you guys still interested in planting a URC church? They said, yeah, we're still in the same position. We would love to have a URC church here. Like, okay, let's begin to explore this. So we have phase one. We've been in phase one in Indianapolis for the last 7 months. We are planning as a council to revisit this in May to determine, are we going to transition from phase one, exploratory, to phase two, core group. We're working through that right now. Phase one, we're doing monthly Bible studies there, monthly exploratory meetings, and we're trying to get the word out in this preliminary way. Lord willing, I expect that we'll transition to phase two in the summertime, because things have been very encouraging, but church plants are very volatile, so maybe we won't. You see also there are some years for Madison, Indiana. We came across a young man in seminary, and he's from Madison, Indiana. His dad is the mayor of Madison. That's a pretty cool thing. Madison is the capital, it's the county seat of Jefferson County, Indiana. This county is rural, so that's hard, right? You have 35,000 people in the county. 55,000, broadly speaking, within the range of Madison, and look to Madison as like a central hub. And so having a rural county, we're mindful in saying, well, we need a longer-term plan to reach a rural county, because there aren't as many people there. We have a few families there that are highly interested, but we have a long-term plan to get Colin, his name's Colin, into the field, but we're requiring years of laying some groundwork. Right now, he's sending out monthly newsletters from seminary, just to tell his family and his friends and all his loved ones what he's doing in seminary, what he's learning in seminary, like the Apostles' Creed and the beauty of Heidelberg Catechism, Question and Answer 1. He's putting that in his newsletters. So family news, what he's learning in his classrooms, sending this out. And then he's coming to Cincinnati this summer for a 10-week internship. Again, to spend weekly time then in Madison, to get to know these contacts better, to work with them. Then our plan is to have him back for a year-long internship after he graduates from seminary. So you see that this is like a multi-year thing. Then maybe after that year-long internship, maybe, we'll see. Maybe the field could be ready to go to send him to be full-time there as a church planter. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But for now, we have plans, and we might have to revise those plans. Okay? But you see, again, if we don't have this plan, we're not going to be doing the long-term preparatory work to get him in the field. So having a written down plan that can then be revised is important. And as I mentioned, the same with Northern Kentucky. The idea of having a daughter church in 2025 will require us in Westside Reformed Church to grow. It will require us to be planning for budgetary purposes to have a daughter church. It will require us to be mindful of having a man out to lead that church plant. So we need to be mindful of potential church planters. Again, the big picture here. This is the key thing. This concept. We need to have a shared concept within our councils and maybe within our classes in order that we can then proactively plan and be careful with God's resources and to be unified in our direction. In this concept, one of the things I'd like to mention, this is one of the criticisms I have of the manual, is the matter of distance. As we think about having a plan for where to plant churches, one of the obvious questions we're faced with is, what about other churches that are out there, especially our NAPARC brethren, right? We have a comity agreement with NAPARC churches where we're going to be loving and respectful to them. And we must, absolutely we must, within this idea of distance, how far should we be from other NAPARC churches? We have to cross that bridge and say, well, where are we going to land on this? The manual suggests that we should think about distance from the perspective of the already reformed person. That because a reformed person can drive 30 minutes to get to their church, then we should make sure our churches are at least 30 minutes away from one another. Is the way the manual kind of approaches it from the reformed believer perspective. I would strongly disagree with that because I think that we need to be thinking about distance, especially in our NAPARC world, from the perspective not of the reformed believer, but rather of the unbeliever and the unchurched. The unbeliever is not going to get in the car and drive 30 minutes to get to the reformed church. But an unbeliever might walk down the streets to a church that's in their neighborhood and in their community. They're not going to go to a different community over. If they're exploring Christianity and want to learn about that, they're not going to get in the car with one of your church members and drive 45 minutes to go worship a God they don't believe in, right? I think we need to be thinking about communities, each community having a NAPARC church. That might mean we're 10 or 15 minutes away from a PCA or OPC. I think that's fine. We want to reach the unbelievers. We also, I think we have a bad category. This isn't from the manual, but we have this category of either conversion or it's sheep stealing. I want to say there's a third category called sheep rescue. Because we confess in the Belgian Confession there are false churches, and we are surrounded by false churches. We have churches that do not feed the sheep with Christ. I want people to be rescued out of that. We want people to be rescued from that, to receive Christ week after week in word and sacraments. So we do not want to sheep steal. But if someone's part of a false church, we want to sheep rescue, and we want to convert. Okay? So I think that thinking about that distance in terms of community is distance in terms of the unbeliever is very important. It's something I've actually observed with the PCA. They get this. I've been scouting out Indianapolis, and I've been learning about the history of church planting in Indianapolis, especially from the PCA. And what they're doing is beautiful. They're planting in one community, then they plant just 10 minutes down the road in the next community, because they are reaching the unbelievers. That's their goal. I think that we often think, well, we can't plant a church 10 or 15 minutes away because then we'll just fight, and then we'll have people shuffling back and forth. That might be the case. I think maybe a greater emphasis on church planting, however, may get us away from that. I'll come back to that later. But again, distance in terms of the unbeliever. I think this is something the PCA gets really right. So I've thrown a lot at you. Let's develop this concept, okay? Let me give you some practical ways of coming up with a concept in your council room. What can you do? I would encourage you in your council room to appoint one member of your council to be tasked with this matter. So one officer, elder, deacon, minister, it is their job to come back with a plan. It is their job to keep a database of contacts, of people you know in the surrounding area. It is their job to think through how to keep the congregation informed and how to bring the congregation on board with a church planting plan. It's that one person's job to be thinking about this constantly. And if a contact comes out of the woodwork, it's that person's job to go sit down and have a cup of coffee with that person, to get to know that person, and to remain in touch with that person. You're thinking, well, in our council, everyone's already overworked. We're already so busy. I think this requires us to ordain an extra person in our council that's tasked with this one thing. We oftentimes ordain and install elders and deacons only for the internal problems of our church, only for the internal needs. But what I'm suggesting is we need an officer who is thinking externally and planning externally for our churches. I think we do well to do this on a classical level as well. We should, I think, strive for that. And we're trying to do that at a synodical level with Rich Bouts. Having somebody who's devoted to this, so we don't lose perspective. So appoint someone to this, I would encourage you. I would also say, hand out maps. This is a really easy way to begin developing a concept for your church. I have a map of the Westside Reformed Church membership and regular visitors. You can see the scatter plot from your Google map there with those blue dots. Now we hold our services in the very middle here. That's the west side of Cincinnati. It's where I live. That's where the bulk of our people live, right around that region. But then you can see that there are scattered groups further afield, such as out in Harrison, see that to the left, and also down in northern Kentucky, south of the river. That's a very different community than the west side. So, as I see this in my Google map, I immediately am thinking, okay, we may have 5 families down here in northern Kentucky that could form a core group in due time. This is helping them think about concept again. Likewise, out to the west with Harrison and then the Indiana border, maybe we could have a core group out there sometime, to have a church plant out in that different community, out in Harrison. Again, non-believers would not drive to us from Harrison, but if they have a church in their hometown, they may very well be willing to visit. You can also see that there's a NAPARC map of Louisville. There are only 3 NAPARC churches in a big city like Louisville. People from these churches down there, and they're all saying, yeah, we would love to have more NAPARC down here. We would love to see a URC down here. That's hopefully for the future. And then on the back, you see a NAPARC map for Indianapolis. A lot healthier there, certainly, but there are definitely communities in Indianapolis that do not have a NAPARC presence. And as I've contacted the pastors in Indianapolis, I've heard one thing in response to our idea. They've said, we would love it if you come to Indianapolis and join us in this church planting work. I've not heard people upset with us. I've not heard people say you're stepping on our toes. But no, they welcome more Reformed churches. Okay, so these are some ways you can develop a concept. Where are the NAPARC churches on these maps you might make? Where is there a lack of NAPARC churches? I would encourage you to be thinking in this way, a twofold way. In urban contexts, what are the distinct communities that lack a NAPARC church? Okay? And then maybe that becomes a target for you. And then in the rural context, what are those counties that don't have a NAPARC church? And what is the key city or town in that rural county that really acts like downtown for the county? I'm from a rural county myself. The county is only about 20,000 people where I'm from, but it functions like one community. And there's one town in my county that everyone goes to for all their shopping, all their eating. That's like downtown. And my parents lived out in the sticks. It's like the suburbs, you could say. There's one community in that county. Identify that key town or city, probably the county seat, and let's see if we can get a NAPARC church in every county seat. So, appoint someone to this, open up your Google Maps and do some scatter plots. It doesn't take that much time. Budget for this. If you begin to budget for this, and budget for such labors, you're going to begin to value this. You're putting your money where your mouth is. You're going to care about this in church planting. This year, we've just become organized, and we're just beginning to meet budget. We've already got $7,000 in this year appointed for exploratory works, For Madison, Indiana, we've got money for an internship. Then we have money set aside for Indianapolis. Again, we need to put money down early on to try these things out, to begin to explore these things, to develop a concept and to work with that concept in order that we don't end up in a bad situation where we just wasted, tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Do the work early on, budget early on, to make sure we're entering into wise church plans. The officer that you appoint to meet with contacts, he needs a budget. He's going to take somebody out for lunch, take someone out for coffee. He needs mileage. Perhaps he thinks it would be wise to run some advertisements in your targeted area. He wants to run some ads on Facebook or run some ads on Google or whatever. He needs a budget for that. Maybe he wants to hold some sort of a special event. We just held a special event in Indianapolis. We had Brian Lee out there to do a talk on the Heidelberg Catechism and the law-gospel distinction in the Heidelberg Catechism, and it really did a great job of raising awareness across Indianapolis. We had a number of people visit, and many more people know about this perspective work. So again, budget. And think about budget as well for internships. Internships are a great way to explore a prospective area without fully investing a minister onto the field. Get an intern out there for a 10-week summer internship. Get an intern in the field for a year. That way, again, we're being very careful before we uproot a family, send them onto the field, and then everything falls apart around them. Last thing on this topic, again, concept is my longest one. Don't worry, the other two will be short. Last thing, involve the congregation. Involve the congregation. We need to use care as we involve the congregation, but we should still involve the congregation. From the very first worship service we had at Westside Reformed Church, this is back in 2013, our very first service, one of the very first words out of my mouth were, we are a church plant here in the West Side. Long term, we want to plant more churches. And that has been a constant message to our congregation from that very first worship service onward. If you walk into our church, you talk to people in our congregation, they know that we are about planting more churches in order that more people can have access to the gospel preached and the gospel in the sacraments. Make your people aware of that. Create a culture that expects that we are planting churches, and we're about that. But also be careful, I would say, that you protect your congregation from dead ends and disappointments. We've already had some dead ends and disappointments in Cincinnati. At one point, I thought we might actually have an East Side URC church plant for Cincinnati really early on because things were coming together in a really weird way. Like, okay, this might actually happen. This is kind of terrifying, but this might be in the Lord's providence. We'll see. I didn't involve the congregation in that. I'm glad I didn't because it fizzled out quickly. I don't want people to become disappointed with dead ends. See what I'm saying? So be careful. But make people aware of it. We've just begun to put Indianapolis on prayer lists for our church. We didn't involve them early on, but now we're beginning to involve the church in an Indianapolis, a prospective Indianapolis work. We make them aware of these things at the end of the year congregational meeting. It's on the budget, right? So we got to talk about it if it's on the budget. And so we're casting a vision for what we hope to accomplish in the upcoming years. Use the congregational meeting for that. Again, we want to establish a culture for this. I mentioned earlier that I think that such a view of church planting can actually really help us from the kind of like reformed infighting and going from one reformed church to the other. Because I think if we have a shared view and a shared mission, we stop fighting with one another. If we become outward looking to how are we going to conquer unbelief in that community, we stop trying to figure out how can I conquer my brother who has a little bit of a different view in the church than I hold. Right? So we have a common enemy, it's a good enemy, which is unbelief. Then we're united, we're joined, we're about something bigger than our little squabble about which Christian school is really the best Christian school. Right? So I'm saying that having this outward looking, missions-minded, church-planting culture, I think will really help bring a lot of healing in an indirect way. To do this, this is a handout for you later, you need to identify hurdles that exist in your church? I just wrote some down that I could imagine. You need to think about your own church, what hurdles exist in your council, and what hurdles exist in your congregation to keep you from having a shared concept, a shared vision, a shared plan for church planting. What hurdles exist? Okay. Now, next 2 points will be short. We've considered concept, and that's where I wanted to major. Again, my big picture encouragement for you is to consider drafting a 10-year plan with your council. That's the, if you don't remember anything else, remember that. Just consider that. A 10-year plan. Because it'll make us wise. It'll make us careful. It'll make us thoughtful. It'll make us revise when things don't go as you planned. Then you have to revise. That's a good thing. Have a plan. Okay? Second point, core group. Let's give you some practical thoughts on growing a core group. I think that we should be very, again, mindful of our NAPARC brethren. Work with them. Work with your NAPARC brethren. Before I entered into Cincinnati, I got together with as many of the NAPARC pastors as I could. I sat down with them, I had lunch with them. If they couldn't get together with me in person, I had conversations on the phone with them. And they were all, again, very welcoming and very encouraging. One of them even gave us a family and said, hey, these guys are in the west side. They're driving across the town right now to our church. We're going to encourage them to come be a part of your work. The PCA did that. It was so humbling to see them do that. Work with them. Work with them when you're selecting a location. Ask them, where do you think that this city or this county, where is another, what would be a good place for another Reformed church to take roots? Where can we plant such a church to be helpful, to work alongside you? I would encourage you also, as you work with those NAPARC pastors, to think about some demographics reports. Demographics are not the be-all and end-all. We're not trying to be like seeker-sensitive Willow Creek or anything like that. But you might learn something about a community that you didn't know through a demographics report. There's a lot there, some good work that was done by my summer intern back in 2015, Isaac Farrell. He joined me in Cincinnati for the summer, and one of the tasks I gave him was to draw up a demographics guidelines that we could share with our classes and that we could use in the future. So he wrote that up for us, and that's been that's very helpful, I think. So again, just be thinking about this. We had somebody in the last session yesterday who said that you can also contact real estate boards to get some good demographics info there too. To say, hey, I'm interested in moving in the area. Can I get a demographics report? And they very quickly will help you out. They won't give you as much as like a church-oriented one will. The church ones will give you religious data as well, and a lot of insight as far as like what families are like and what families value. Again, we're not going to be seeker sensitive and stuff. We're going to, again, word, sacrament, confessional, but it's really helpful to know your audience. To whom are you speaking? Where are you? So think about that demographics report as well. Once you enter into this core group stage, once you move from explorations into core group, you need a professional web presence. Do not ask Uncle Bob to do it on the cheap for you. If you're going to invest yourself in a core group in one place, you need to say, we're all in. We're going for this. And your front porch, your first impression is your website. Even if you're the one who met someone face-to-face, that person who met you is going to go to your website to learn about you. What are they going to see on your website? Are they going to see a welcoming community? Are they going to see a church on the website that helps prepare them for what they're going to encounter on Sunday? Don't give them bait and switch. Give them an authentic, a sincere picture of what they will encounter when they walk into your church. What do you value? Put that on your website. Even if it scares people away, put it there. Be real. People want to see authenticity. Be authentic. Have a good web presence that accurately reflects who you are. Use Facebook and Twitter, but not too much. You can link up Facebook page with Twitter account, So if you post something on your Facebook page, it automatically goes to your Twitter feed. You don't even need to log into Twitter ever again. I recommend never logging into Twitter ever again. It's depressing. Good grief. But link up those things because those are avenues for people finding you. Also, I would say with this web presence that you want to establish, I think we should abandon sermon audio as that web platform, personally. Here's why. You can easily host your sermons on your website for much cheaper than you're paying sermon audio. It's much cheaper. Put it on your website. If you are sending people away from your website to get your sermons, that's a problem. Don't send them away from your website. Keep them on your website. Why would you send them somewhere else? They're just going to find some random crazy Baptist there anyway. That's what we find there. I'm serious. Have instead podcast. Put it on your website, and then you can have a web developer link up your website to your podcast. So your church has a podcast. I'm telling you right now, I did not think this would happen, but I moved away from sermon audio and I got a podcast. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll try this out. And then all of a sudden, my congregants began to listen to my sermon a second time. They began, because they're commuting anyway, that's how they consume all of their audio. And so then I have a number of people in my church who listen to every sermon I give twice. I mean, isn't that awesome? You're preparing hours for your sermons. Don't you want to get twice the mileage out of those sermons? Get a podcast. It's yours. It's for your church. And everyone has that in their phone as they're going about their driving to and from work. And also, when your congregation is on vacation, it's so much easier. It just goes right to their phone. Now all of a sudden, people in my church, when they're on vacation, they've got their podcast. They can pull up and keep up with where you are in your sermon series. Do podcast. It's bigger upfront cost, but long term, it'll be a lot cheaper than sermon audio. That's a lot more of how people are using audio. Nobody goes to sermon audio to find a church. I promise you. Nobody does that. Also, your overseas listeners don't matter. I think that we can have this overinflated view of ourselves because, oh, I had 3 people from Singapore listen to my sermon. I had 5 people from China. Oh, I'm having a worldwide impact. No, you're not. They needed their own pastor in their own church. You're not a celebrity. Stop trying to be a celebrity. Think about your people alone, in your context alone. Other things you can do. White Horse and discussion groups. I think you can do those for a season. They can be very helpful. Have a White Horse and discussion group. Establish it for a few months. You can bless other churches. You can join with other churches in such an endeavor. That's a great way to work across NAPARC lines. Or maybe even you want to work with a local LCMS, I don't know, Lutheran church or something like that, in a White Horse and discussion context. Use wisdom. But when you do set up these discussion groups, what happens is White Horse and Modern Reformation will send an email blast to the entire area surrounding your White Horse and discussion group and let them know that you're doing that there. So we got one contact, and they became members of our church through a White Horse and discussion group. Another thing, you can do that also with Ligonier events. So if you host a Ligonier event in your location, then they will alert all of their Ligonier contacts in your location that you exist and you're hosting a Ligonier event. So consider that to grow a core group. Think about targeted ads. When I was started in Cincinnati, I actually came across a contact that didn't become a member of our church, but a contact nevertheless, because I put Facebook ads on that were targeting Dutch people in Cincinnati. It's pretty awesome. Like my ad on Facebook was like, Dutch Reform returns to Cincinnati. And then I had somebody reach out to me because I targeted it toward Calvin College graduates, Hope College graduates, Dordt College graduates. So they all were receiving this thing about Dutch Reform back in Cincinnati. And you can play around with that sort of thing. Target your ads to people who have an interest, a similar interest in theology. You can target these kinds of things. Who has clicked like for John Piper? You can target ads to those people. Those celebrities can be good for something, right? I would encourage you in this core group phase to think about having Sunday evening services, small group services just for your core group. If we want to be Word and Sacrament church, I think we should build our church from the very beginning with Word and Sacraments. But don't put that on Sunday mornings. Not early on, please don't. We've heard mornings already. Our story was one too, where we went to Sunday mornings too quickly. But Sunday evenings are great. It gets people in the concept of having evening service. You also do weekday studies, weekday services. These things are really good for visitors. What we had in Cincinnati early on, we had people who would go to their liberal mainline church in the morning, then they come to us in the afternoon. And when they saw the difference between what they were experiencing, they very quickly joined us. But they wouldn't have come to us if we were on Sunday morning because they weren't quite sure. They weren't ready to cut the ties with their liberal church. So I think that Sunday evenings can be very, very helpful for initial core group services. Helps people to figure out what they're getting if they walk into a small group worship service. It also helps you with support raising. Quick note on support raising as you're developing a core group. I think it's very important that you can very quickly tell people how much money you need. Give firm figures. This year we need $50,000. And then I would say, here's Campus Crusade influence. Then break it down for them to say, what this means is I need 5 churches that can give us $5,000 a year. I need 10 churches that can give us $1,000 a year. I need whatever, fill the rest in for $2,500 a year. So you're giving people something really real and concrete to say, hey, I can be one of those churches. We can be one of these churches. We're not big enough to give you $5,000, but we can be one of those churches that give you $1,000 a year. And I can jump on board with you and partner with you. Give very firm figures, break it down for them, and then send handwritten thank you cards. People appreciate that very much. Okay, congregation. Third point, quickest. Don't go to the congregation phase, namely phase 3, Sunday morning worship too quickly. Don't do it. Resist the urge. Americans have an expectation for what they're going to encounter on Sunday morning that is different from their expectation for Sunday evening. If people are going to walk into a church on a Sunday evening, they're not expecting many people. That's why it works for you to have a small group worship on Sunday evenings. Nobody expects something big. But if they come in on a Sunday morning and you are one of 10 people, you're weird. And you can give the best sermon of all your life. You can declare Christ crucified. The glory can be emanating. But they will say, you're one of 10 people, you're a cult. I'm terrified. I'm exposed. They're not even listening to your sermon because they're freaked out. Don't go to Sunday mornings too quickly. The weird factor is very real for Sunday mornings, especially when you hit summertime and your people are traveling in summertime. We launched Sunday morning services. We go, oh, we've got 30-some people right now. This is great. Let's go to Sunday mornings. We're getting sick of Sunday afternoons, actually. We're getting sick of Sunday afternoons anyway. We'll have both of our services on Sunday morning. Let's do it. Let's go for it. And then summer hit. And then I was one of 12 people a couple Sundays. We had some visitors come on those Sundays. They were utterly terrified. Again, if they had come on a Sunday afternoon or evening, it would not have been the same thing, I guarantee. When you're in that congregation phase, you can be thinking a lot about oversights. You should be thinking about oversight the entire time, but this is where I'm putting it. We've got a document here, Guidelines for Church Planting and Missions. This is a document that my consistory was tasked with by Classes Eastern U.S. to think about how we might better oversee church plants. And basically what we did was, we took the principles out of here, we took the principles out of the church order, tried to bring that together in our real experience, and then we came up with these guidelines for how to oversee a church plant. This is the second point of gentle criticism I had with the missions manual. This document here speaks also about distance church planting. The book says that if you can't send an elder to every Sunday service, then you're not providing proper oversight. I find it to be problematic. That if a mother church's elders can't be with you every Sunday, that you're doing something wrong there. I don't agree with that. I don't think the Apostle Paul, when they were planting churches, were afraid to go to a distance and plant a church. I think if we took this mindset, we could never plant in a foreign field. Because how could you ever get your overseeing elders on the foreign field every single Sunday? You can't do it. So distance church planting is more like foreign church planting. Now, that doesn't mean that we ignore oversight, though. The document will help you think about distance oversights. We have all sorts of resources nowadays, audio files on your website, on your podcast. You can share your bulletins on the web with your overseeing elders. Congregation can easily get in touch with overseeing elders. We should not, I think, be afraid of distance church planting, but we should be very careful about distance church planting. That should be undertaken with much greater reverence and fear than when we plant a daughter church 30 minutes away. So, concept, core group, congregation. Big picture, let's be more planned. Let's be more careful. Let's be more thoughtful. Let's be more forward-thinking, or that we're being wise, or that we're utilizing resources carefully. Let's plan and then revise plans when they don't go in God's providence as we thought they might. Okay, I'll close it there. Discussion, like questions for me, opportunities for clarification. Yeah, Tom.
Two questions.
Yeah.
So, we have people right now in Indianapolis that are interested in a church plant.
Yes.
So, how many and how did you identify these people?
So how many right now? There would be 19 very firm, then there are 19 souls, obviously, not families. And then a couple other families on the fringes that are quite interested. So I think we could quickly hit 30 souls. It's like four families, 19 souls right now. How do we get in touch with them? I got an email right when I arrived in Cincinnati saying, hey, Zach, you should really talk to such and such a person from Indianapolis. He would really love what you're doing. Reach out to him. We've been friends for 5 years now, and we've just maintained contacts. So, yeah. Otherwise, it's been word of mouth, and then a little bit of internet advertising that we've just begun to do. Mainly word of mouth.
And the second question was, you mentioned earlier that you...
Oh, sorry. In Dutch transplants. That's part of it too. Indianapolis is a place right now, this is one of our reasons we're targeting it, where people from like Chicagoland area are moving to get work. Because people are fleeing Illinois right now, right? And a lot of young people as well are trying to go to urban places to find work. And so we're looking at Indianapolis like, this is a place, it's close to Grand Rapids, West Michigan, close to Chicago, guarantee we're gonna have Dutch people who are going there from a URC church, and it would be great that they could remain in the URC. Not that the PCA is bad, not that the OPC is bad, but it's wonderful if you can remain in the church of your upbringing. So that's part of it too. So sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. I think you mentioned that the PCA will plan according to communities. Mm-hmm. So how are you, or they, or you defining a community?
Very vaguely. The way that I think about it, I'm open to being, sharpening my thinking, is just like a self-understanding, like in the west side of Cincinnati. West side, they're West Siders, and they know they're not East Siders, and they know this imaginary border that when you cross it, you're no longer in the West Side. Like the sort of self-understanding, a self-identity, where they interact with one another, and to drive across the community is nothing. Oh yeah, I go to Lowe's over there, I go over here and do my shopping, but then all of a sudden if you plant a church outside whatever this imaginary border is, they feel like it's further away than it really is. You know what I mean? So like for us in the West Side, if we planted in just 5 minutes, 10 minutes north of where we are right now, everyone would like, oh, that's too far away. That's like in a different part of the city. It's not. But they think in terms of, I think, community. It's really vague in my mind, and maybe it's just a vague thing. I don't know. But yeah, any thoughts?
No, I was thinking about our local mega church.
Yeah.
So they have the campus model where they have their main campus, and then they beam the pastor into the different campuses. But in the high desert, you have Apple Valley, Victorville. You have different actual cities. So they go by city. But I mean, I feel like we're fighting against this sort of thing too.
I have an observation and maybe a proposal for us to think about, and it refers to the point concerning having representatives of consistories to be present in the church planting. I understand your point and I agree with that, something concerning foreign missions. I think that we need to implement the concept of church visits. In our experience, we had a number of visiting preachers, such as Reverend Tedrick, Bout, Brian Lee, and others. But it is one thing to have a preacher visiting just to preach, but it is a different thing to educate people, to have church visitors coming regularly on the field, especially where there is not a tradition concerning the formation of elders and deacons. Sometimes ministers are a little alone, and so that's just a thought. Since tomorrow there will be more discussions about how to develop our understanding of missions, I think that the principle of church visit is important for foreign missions too. The people, the church members, elders, and deacons, and as well as ministers, should know that there is this understanding, this need to develop cooperation, openness, transparency. Our experience in Italy and Europe, usually missionaries or pastors are, examined, evaluated, but other people need to be examined and evaluated too. So while I agree with what you just said about having a constant presence of elders in the church plan, with the church plan, nevertheless, especially in relationship to foreign mission, I think that that is something that should be implemented.
How often would you?
Well, our church order speaks about 2 years. In our churches, in our classes, we have church visitors going around every 2 years. I think that, not less than 2 years. For new works, new church plans, even once a year.
Yeah, so I was asking.
For example, I just moved to Perugia to plant a new church 9 months ago. I don't mind having someone coming every year.
Can I address that a little bit, Zach?
Please go for it, yeah.
I think this is something that we really want, a model we want to move towards. Like you look at the other NAPAR churches when they plant a church, they're very thorough in that they have a great relationship with the church plants. Take that very seriously. So I know the guys in the OPC, they're there at least every year on all their fields. I think it's really important to do that. I would love to see it on a committee level, as missions coordinator, as a committee level, but also working with the local church so that that's done at the same time, so that our church planters and missions feel more connected. One of the things that I've seen even when I visited guys like you, the church plant themselves, to realize they're part of something bigger than just this is really important. And we've got to do a better job at it, there's no doubt.
Yeah, in Cincinnati, or just maybe how that works for a distance church plant in Cincinnati, we had the elders from Zelterreich, our overseeing church, would come at least once a year to visit. But it ended up being much more than once a year. Probably on average 2 or 3 times a year we had someone from consistory from Pennsylvania in Cincinnati. Sometimes it became like, hey, you're going to be nearby in a couple weeks. I'm going to swing by and make that work. Sometimes it was planning more out in advance. And that was always very important and helpful to have somebody from the outside again to give oversight, flesh and blood, you know. So.
Yes, Zach, I appreciate your presentation today, especially that from the beginning, you said, hey, we're going to plant other churches. To me, that's incredibly brave to say that as a church plant, because sometimes you get the idea that we want to establish something and see it out to be 300 families that kind of the normal, so to speak, church. I've served two normal churches, we would say, established churches. How do you combat, or even have you encountered the mindset where we seek to build it? I give the example of the Tower of Babel model versus the idea that we should be more church planting minded. How do you come into a church that has a mentality like, well, they can drive 40 miles here, it's okay, we don't need to plant a church. We're facing that mentality in Calgary, for example. Advice for that? How do you, or just build that slowly?
I would probably begin, I'd welcome anybody else's thoughts on this too. I don't feel like I have any expertise in this, but just my gut would say that going at it again from the perspective of the unbeliever, that's probably the key way of doing it. Because again, I think that's why I'm talking about communities, because I think an unbeliever will visit churches maybe in their community, but they won't go outside of it. And so if you have somebody driving from 40 minutes away, then can you actually bring a friend with you? Even a believing friend that goes to a false church might not come that far with you, much less an unbeliever. So then that becomes an opportunity.
That's exactly what we're facing.
Yeah.
When we start talking about building a church where we want people bringing neighbors to church, and they say, well, Pastor, I live 35 minutes away, and I'm like, this is why we need exactly what you said.
One of the things that we did in Cincinnati that I think we're going to continue to try to do, and I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but we began to hold evening services in other locations to try to serve. So if you remember the map, we had scatter there. So we go into one of those for Sunday evening services, because we currently have our two services on Sunday morning. So we actually had 3 services when Isaac Farrell was in Cincinnati for an internship with me. So we did evening services there. We did a lot of advertising. Actually, quite a few visitors from there. And then those people who lived there could bring their friends and their family members who wouldn't come over to our ordinary place. So that can be a way of trying it out and getting people taste for it, maybe. Other thoughts you might have. Yeah, sure.
One.
Okay. Yeah, when you're, I guess. Ben?
Yep. Okay. I was just curious. You're in just outside of Cincinnati, I guess, in northern Kentucky. You have a unique element in the Creation Museum. And I was wondering how you, reached out to the visitors there. Do you get visitors from that? I know that I went to the Ark and I visited.
That's pretty common,
right?
What your family did is very common. But we don't really, because they're just people from out of town, and we're focused on our congregation, and then having our congregation try to bring in their neighbor.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be going beyond that narrow goal. So that's, maybe I'm wrong with that, but that's kind of the way we've not really given much thought. If we had a church down there, they could probably think about themselves as they get to know the area. But again, I just don't think that long term that's a very effective way of building up one local congregation, developing a family there. So,
sure, thanks.
Taylor.
In that initial stage of building or establishing the interest and forming the core group, and you have kind of a community defined in the scenario imaginary, what are some things, practical things that you can do outside of Whitehorse Inn or Ligonier to reach the unbelievers in the community? What are some things that you've done in Cincinnati?
Nothing that well, to be quite frank. We've held Bible studies in various locations, and we try to send out adverts for Bible study, just introduction to the Gospel of Mark or something like that. We've had some unbelievers show up for that, but we've done some backyard VBS. So rather than doing one centralized VBS, we've done that where a family will host a VBS in their backyard for a week, and they invite the whole street to come to it. Right. I think maybe a better model, because then you still have a long-term connection. You're not just being used like daycare, but you have a long-term connection with people on that street, and you're working with that street. I've tried to encourage that more with our people. It's not always been practical when to host something like that. I think that could be a good path forward. Yeah, other thoughts?
I was just gonna say, it's along the same line of White Horse Inn and Ligonier, but we've used the Christianity Explored a couple times in the community. And for those of you who aren't aware, but it goes through the Gospel of Mark. It's a 7-week thing. And they do a really great job. It's very accessible, it's very faithful, and it can help people in the church bone up on some apologetic skills, and it's a great way to introduce people to the scriptures and Christ.
That's a great resource. When I was in England, our church used that a lot. And that was always even an easier first step to bring your unbelieving friend or your nominal Christian friend before taking the worship service. Just an on-ramp, you know.
You have a lot of people from the community who take their unbelieving neighbors, friends.
In terms of people from our church, you're saying?
Yeah.
No, we do not. No. So it's, I think people in our church have made a genuine effort at bringing people. Our area is not so much like pagan unbelief. It's staunch Roman Catholic. And so we don't really have too many people that are unbelievers, but the whole area is false church. So breaking into a Roman Catholic, we've had a few people from those backgrounds have come, but then the family pressure has been overwhelming. They've not really stuck with us. But yeah, I mean, I think our church has done a decent job of trying, but it's not been too effective bringing a lot of visitors. Just complete transparency here. Oh, we've also been doing like a Wednesday evening service. That's been something that we just are adding actually a couple members who began to join us through the Wednesday evening service, and they got a taste for us there, and then they began to come regularly on Sunday mornings, and so that could be another possible route
Can
as
you
well.
briefly describe what that looks like? Wednesdays?
I mean, we just use our liturgical forms. We get that maroon book, we open it up, we pray together, we sing some psalms together. I read from scripture together, and then I've been just finished a series on bioethics. I try to make some like practical, provocative almost. I started doing some on doctrine of vocation, then I do like hospitality, and so just things that are very hands-on, but also in a kind of a reverent, worshipful environment that accurately reflects our Sunday mornings. So it kind of becomes a gateway to our Sunday mornings, I think.
You have an open house once a week? Does your facility have an open house for the community that you advertise to the community? Hey, you can come in, get a coffee, and get to know us. And I do it. I give a message every time too. It's a 10-minute message.
That's really great. I think that one of the things that we church plants struggle with, we don't often think about this, is that I think we are under-resourced financially to have properties where you can do those kinds of things.
Oh, so you don't have a
We don't.
facility.
I mean, we would be, I can't imagine where we could do that. But I think that church planting is you are so set back. You don't have a permanent location for people to know you. You don't have resources at your disposal to utilize for midweek kind of events oftentimes. I think it's just, it's hard.
Another thing we're kicking around, I don't know if it'll take off or not, is a community garden. We have fortunate to have some space, some arable land, and might be kind of neat.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys. Yeah,
Yeah, just follow up from yours. Because I worship with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you have it like only on Sundays?
Yes.
No,
We can rent it other times of the week, but where we're located there is way off the thoroughfare, like nobody
Yeah.
really knows it exists kind of thing, you know.
But for a church plant, we think would it be the best utilization of time and finances to do a storefront?
We tried that once, we
It's
looked into it.
expensive?
We weren't convinced that particular location was gonna be beneficial for us.
Okay.
And then also, we've been still really kind of, again, given the Roman Catholic context, they view like the building, a church building as so essential, right? And like a traditional building is so essential that we've also been very wary of a move like that into a non-historical church property, because everyone would look at us even more like a cult than they already do. So,
Yeah, in our community, we don't worry about that.
Yeah.
So, I guess, yeah, the community you're in,
Big
you have
time.
to take that into
Yeah.
account.
Best situation for us would be to have a very traditional church building that is on, a main thoroughfare, and I think that would give us legitimacy. But again, resources, it's not that easy to, get $500,000, $1 million to get a church property.
Unless you know some.
All right. Well, I think we'll close there. Anybody have the forms of prayers with them? It's going to use our missions prayer. This might be it. Let's liturgical forms are fantastic. Brian read earlier from the morning prayer. Oh, come on, please. There we go. We got this. Here's our prayer for missions. Let's pray and close. O God the Father, whose Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, is the desire of all nations, and who came down from heaven to seek and to save the lost, grant your blessing upon your missionary servants who are carrying the light of your gospel into the darkness. Preserve them from every danger to which they may be exposed, from perils by land and sea, from persecution and pestilence, from discouragement in their labors, and from the devices of the adversary. May they see your work prospering through their words and deeds. Hasten the fullness of your kingdom. Pour out your Spirit upon all flesh. Cause multitudes of those who neglect your salvation to seek after you and find you. And so, gather multitudes into your church. Hasten the day when those in every land shall be converted to you. Lord Jesus, with the Father and the Holy Spirit, we give you all honor and glory, world without end. Amen.